This is a fundamentally important aspect of the Marxist understanding, not only of the phenomena of price, but also of the ideal, the problem of the idealization of activity as such. This act of exchange always presupposes an already established system of relations between people mediated by things and expressed always in the fact that one of the sensually perceptible things, bodies, bracket, this may be the body of an individual, bracket close, is quote unquote expelled from this system and without ceasing to function as an individually sensually perceptive body is transformed into the representative of any other body of this sorry of this system in a sensually perceived body of an ideal image. This thing, while remaining itself, at the same time turns out to be external embodiment of another thing, not its immediately physical, sensually perceived appearance, but rather its essence, that is, the law of its existence inside that system, which creates this original situation. This thing is thus transformed into a symbol, the meaning of which always remains external to its immediately perceived appearance, into other sensually perceived things, and is revealed only through the whole system of relations of other things towards this given thing, or conversely, this thing towards all the others. When effectively removed from the system, this sensually perceived thing loses its role, its symbolic meaning, bracket, its meaning as a symbol, bracket closed, and is again transformed into an ordinary sensually perceived thing along with other such things. This shows that its existence and functioning as a symbol belong not only to it as such, but merely to that system within which it proved to be such. Indeed, the features belonging to it by nature, physical, sensually perceived appearance, therefore, have no relation whatsoever to its being as a symbol. The physical, sensually perceived shell, quote unquote, body of the symbol, bracket open, the body of that thing which has been turned into a symbol, bracket close, for its existence as a symbol is something completely insignificant, ephemeral, temporal, quote, a, a function, a functional existence, unquote. Such a thing absorbs, as Marx expresses its quote material existence, unquote.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's a really challenging
Very dense.
section. Um, Last time we were focusing on price, and that's the most recent um, example that we have of what this paragraph is talking about. Any either attempts to unpick any parts of this paragraph or comments or questions? Um, Lars, you're muted if you're saying anything, Lars.
Yeah, right. No, no, I'm unmuted. Well, I've been thinking about this, um, the thing being transformed. It says on several occasions, this thing is thus transformed into a symbol, the meaning of which always remains external. It's
Mm.
who is doing this transformation? I mean, it seems like sometimes Ilyenkov state that the thing transforms itself into something else. But isn't that the way? Is that the way we should understand it, or is it the individual that doing the transformation, or how is that carried out? This is a real problem for me to understand.
Um, so I guess just to answer firstly, we're on page 9, and this is the second paragraph on page 9. Um, so maybe I can partly get at that and just a few of the things which I take from this paragraph, and then it would be great if there are other comments or questions or to answer Lars about what's transformed. Well, so the first thing I think we need to remember is the centrality of activity. So the activity isn't necessarily something that's particular to one person. It's not that one person is choosing to do this activity. Is something which is a general description of kind of the effects, the changes that are happening between people and with material stuff. So that's part of it. The other thing I would just mention is I think this is quite important to how David Backhurst is interpreting Ilyenkov, because what part of the contrast you have here is between representation and inference, that what the symbol as a symbol is doing, it there isn't like a symbol that's just sort of existing on its own. It is performing a function, and that function, again, it's not kind of defined as a straightforward if this then that statement. It's relating to lots of other symbols. So there's like a space of functions, if we want to talk about it that way, or a space of reasons. And if we just focus on one of them on its own and look at it as this thing is representing this other thing, then we lose the fact that something like price is only price when you're aware of the fact that what you're actually talking about isn't representation. It's a function that implicates lots of other things at the same time. And whereas for the kind of links that Backhurst is making, that's all about there being a system of concepts. I think, well, I guess what a concept is for Ilyenkov is different, but also this isn't just mental. That system is a system of physical operations. So there are lots of things being tied in materially and conceptually. If we kind of remember that concepts and material are themselves a unity, I think the easiest way to think about it is the symbol is an argument of a system of lots of different functions, and those functions are only functions because of actual activity, actual people trying to do things with it. I myself got tangled up lots in trying to talk about it. So if anyone either can help with questions or comments of their own, that would be great.
Yeah, I would try to answer Lars, and maybe it also concerns what you said. I think in a way, Ilyenkov often uses a kind of, so to say, pedagogical rhetorics in that, for example, he says that there is a thing which we perceive by the senses, and it's just the thing. And then there is something like the ideal, which is which concerns the symbolic meaning, which somehow remains external to the thing, as a sensuously perceived thing, in that it only works, the symbolic meaning, it only has in terms of the semantic relationships and other relationships it has in a certain system of meaning. When we take the thing outside of the system, it's again just a thing. So maybe better than money itself, but also money. If you have a coin, I quoted, for example, this in my paper with Paula Rauhala on the money issue in Ilyenkov. Maybe you remember the scene when Robinson is coming to the island and goes back to the shipwreck, right? And there he discovers that there's a lot of silver coins on board, and he thinks his first reaction is like, "Oh, drug, what are you good for?" It's the exact quote. So it's totally useless for him. But then he has second thoughts, of course, and takes some of it with him. That's exactly what Ilyenkov is talking about. One thing is just the coins, the silver, but out of context, on a desert island, it's just, it's nothing. It's not even worth anything. So that's, I think, external. External is just the emphasis on the relationship in a social system, we could say.
Yeah, I completely understand that. You know, that makes much sense to me. But then the transformation itself from the thing outside this particular activity into this activity where it's relevant in some sense for people doing the things they're doing there. How does that transformation occur?
I think.
Okay.
I was responding to Lars' query. I think the main question that Lars is posing, I think, is concerned with how does this transformation really takes place. So I think you, as you know, people before me said that it happens with the practical activity of men, and the kind of social relations that come with that. So it is not that a single individual as such does that transformation, but it is the transformation occurs through those social relations and activities in the, yeah. So yeah, in that the system that comes about with that activity. So yeah, it is not that any single individual does that in that sense.
Exactly, and also in terms of the agency, I think this was the main question here. Does the thing transform itself? No, it doesn't. Of course not. It's and I think it's clear from the text when the thing is removed. So in this in the example I quoted, it's removed by a storm, so to say. So where's the agency? The agency is could be anything, but it's not some kind of agency of the thing itself. It's always, you know, connected with social relations.
Yeah. Social relations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't okay? Isn't the agent and the individual doing this transformation? Or?
No, the individual doesn't. Let's go back.
The individual is, I think, to just to put it in other words, the individual is situated within that social context, and
yeah,
he within that social context he does play a role, but it is not necessary that he may be conscious of that, fully conscious of the totality of those relations.
yeah,
Like for example, like in this the commodity, the phenomena of commodity fetishism. So it's not that a single individual, the individuals as such are not conscious of what they are doing, but they are, in the words of Marx, they do not know what they are doing, but nonetheless they do it. So the individual is situated in that way, in that whole social context, but the whole process of transformation is done by humans.
Mhm. Yeah. Well,
thank you.
and like, if we use Sasha's example, like, so we have this shipwreck and these pieces of silver, and he thinks these are useless. And why are they then not useless? Because potentially another ship is going to pick him up, and then suddenly it looks like the pieces are transformed, and suddenly they take on this value. Well, it's neither magic nor something what Robinson himself is doing. He finds that silver is again of value because it is reintegrated into a system, which is these people, whoever they are, pirates or whatever, are going to be like, oh, I want those silver.
Yeah, exactly.
And it kind of, the social relation is again excavated from what is objectified in those pieces of silver. And it isn't just the individual, because although he criticizes him earlier, this again is a point that Wittgenstein makes as well. Like, if I have a box with, and I say there's a beetle in it, or we all have this box that has this beetle in it, and we're not showing it to anyone else, then we can neither know that what all of us mean by beetle is to say, nor can we really make any inferences by it. We can't have like a private language or private value in the same way that we can't pay ourselves, like from one hand to the other. All it's referring to is exchange. It ultimately is all about social relations. So the system, where I think it's more interesting perhaps than other ways which system has been understood in the approaches inspired by Wittgenstein, which David Backes is interested in, is it's not just system in the sense of semantic system. It's an actual functioning system, and you can look at how is this stuff moving around, what's done with it, and that's what gives it its meaning. Anything else to say about this paragraph before we keep going? Corinna.
Well, just that Olga said she in that first sentence she thought activity should be actuality. And this is the very first sentence. The fundamentally important blah 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 blah. The problems of idealization of art. It says activity as such. She thought it should be actuality. Yeah. But maybe Sasha can check that some other time.
It's interesting because that's obviously is also like the famous Hegel preface to Philosophy of Right. What is real is actual. Does actual as in potentially has that double meaning of real and involving activity.
Something to clarify in the translation.
Yes, and it would be an important point. I have to check it with the Russian. I don't have it now here. Mm-hmm. It would surprise me if it would be actuality, actually, because it's exactly what he wants to say. It's the idealization of activity. Mm-hmm. That's the whole point. And that's what we are talking about. It's what was called the practice interpretation of Marx Feuerbach thesis. Also, it's the practice, and that's the activity, and not some kind of actuality. It's not. No, I'm not sure about this. So I would doubt this interpretation. But of course, it could be that it's in the text. But I also doubt that Giuliano went off so far from the original.
And also it works. Oh, sorry.
I didn't actually understand the last sentence in this paragraph. And I unfortunately quote from Capital. I couldn't find a reference.
Right.
I didn't understand what he meant. The last section of that.
Physical sensuality perceived shell body of the symbol. So, yeah.
I couldn't understand that such a thing absorbs its material existence. What does that mean? The thing is the body.
Yeah. Okay, so that second reference, so it's a first referring to the signifier, and it then switches to referring to the signified. So the thing being signified, so the signifier is absorbing a material existence, as in I think it's just saying the material token that it is, the token is in a particular form, like it has a material form, but that material form is not what's giving it its meaning. I think that's all I'd say.
Yeah. It's not very clearly expressed, is it?
Yeah. Well, just the last thing to say is that this is what I was asking for those of you on Facebook. I was asking about to what extent can the term reification be applied here, and I think this is kind of, especially that start. If it's idealization of activity, then perhaps it's reification applies here as a concept in a broader, not in Lukash's sense. Anyway.
It's a good question, but I think there's no direct answer to the question, because it depends on another circumstance. Because in this case, if you would have a clear-cut, if you would expect a clear-cut answer, every conceptualization would be a reification. That's would be strange. I mean, that's not how we would think of it. I think reification is much more is a much more definite way of conceptualization, and basically maybe a wrong way in terms of a process approach, for example.
Right. Yes. Yes. So our discussion was exactly this. So for Lukács, it's an incorrect. It's us believing that what is a relation between things is that this object. It's like that substitution, but I was specifically asking if actually we could substitute it for broader kinds of objectification, in the sense that every concept
absolutely
is actually
yes yes, every concept has this aspect. That's what makes it so tricky, and that's why you can fall into the what we were with Whitehead, the fallacy of what he called it, the fallacy of false localization. So that you have a point in time and space which you can, go back to again and again, because the concepts, they give us a certain kind of orientation as well. It seems like we could go back there and we have a definite meaning, but the meaning also changes, as Ilyenkov says here, with the social relations. So we can never go back actually to this. And reifying is always, in terms of objectification, an aspect of conceptualization. In this respect, you are right. Yes.
Thanks. Okay, should we look at the next paragraph, which is shorter? Let's see if it's simpler. Lars?
Sorry, I just have another tricky thing here. It says, well, the last third of the paragraph, something like this. The sensually perceived thing loses its role, its symbolic meaning. Does that mean that we assign the meaning to the symbol in some way that is sort of embedded in the symbol, or how shall we understand this particular aspect of what he's saying here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, the shipwreck, what happens to that piece of gold or that piece of silver? It stops being that symbol that it is, and we suddenly notice it as a piece of silver.
Yep, but the piece of silver is just a piece of silver, regardless in which activity it is. The meaning is not sort of included in the particular coin itself, but there must be some other mechanism assigning or allocating that meaning to the coin, I think. Or is that?
Yes. Well, so when I pay for things, I don't really look at any of the coins. I just have a kind of recognition. This is a £1, and I freeze its value as a £1 coin. I just all I'm checking for when I dig my hand into my pocket is, do I have £1 coins? Do I have 10p pieces in the UK? And perhaps this is, well, it would be sounding foreign to you because you have other currency, and if you came to England, it would take you a little bit of time to adjust to this system, but you have a different system. And I'm not treating it, I'm not studying the grooves in the £1 coin. If suddenly I was on a desert island and found a coin, then I might be like, oh, what's this drawing on it, etc. So some of that sublation that happens where I'm just treating it as £1 coin as part of the activity, I'm suddenly re-noticing it as an object. when it's kind of defamiliarized outside of the activity in which I'm used to using it.
When somebody throws it at you, for example. Yes, I agree. And I think that's why Ilyenkov uses this kind of language. What I'm not sure about is, I mean, this kind of language of the thing and the external meaning. Yes, I think it's a kind of pedagogical strategy or something to make it really clear to, you know, we have this and then we have that. But the more interesting question would be, no matter how we look at a thing, can we really see the thing itself? Is there not something always symbolic in a way? So this would be, for example, what the more idealist philosophers who had the same problem in mind would argue for. We cannot exactly make sure what kind of symbolic meaning this particular thing has for all the persons on the world, but that it always has a symbolic meaning is somehow their kind of idealist hypothesis. Idealist maybe in a quotation mark, but I think this is not excluded in Ilyenkov, but it's also not explained. It remains a little bit open.
Yeah, I just want to read out some comments in the chat and then I'll come to Yanis. I'm not sure, or I can't remember, Sane Collective, who you are.
Sorry, it's Penny.
Oh, hi, Penny.
I'm signed in with the collective's email.
Okay.
I'll change it.
So firstly, Paul, is making the point, the thing remains itself and another, it is transformed yet remains the same. And then I think Penny is pointing out that kind of aspect of, I guess, part of what's tradition is the reification. So, but the silver must have been mined, refined, etc. So although it loses one aspect of its meaning on the desert island, it is still not just a piece of silver, even if the person finding it doesn't know or isn't aware of its connection or subjectively gives it a meaning. Yanis, do you want to unmute?
Yes. I want to have only a short comment about the questions that Lars elaborated. From Marx's point of view, of course, the money is a symbol, function as a symbol in a capitalist economy. But the fact that the money is symbol does not mean that it's something subjective. It's something material and objective, because in money form, it is a specific expenditure of labor power that it is embodied in this symbol. So the fact that in capitalism, in the economic activity of capitalism, objects mediate the activity and the relations among people, makes this symbol material. It is the labor power, a specific expenditure of labor power, that makes money exactly. So it's very important to me to don't understand money something or some other medium, not something exactly, not something subjective, only subjective, but it's something objective, material in the system. That's my comment.
Thank you. Okay, so do we have any volunteers to read the next paragraph, which is quite short? Paul, thank you.
This takes place, then the material body of this thing is brought into agreement with its function. As a result, the symbol turns into a sign, that is, into an object which in itself does not mean anything, but only represents, expresses another object with which it has nothing directly in common, as, for example, the name of a thing with the thing itself. The dialectic of the transformation of object into symbol and symbol into sign is also traced in Das Kapital on the problem of the emergence and evolution of the money form of value. The functional existence of the symbol resides in the fact that it represents not itself, not its sensuously perceived body, but another, and in doing so is the means, the instrument for revealing the essence of other sensually perceived things, that is, their universal and the immediate, brackets, their social human meaning, that is, their role and function within the social organism, close brackets, law of production and reproduction of things through human activity. The symbol thus functions exactly as the immediate body of the ideal image of external things, or more precisely, its law of existence, the universal.
Okay, thank you. I have one question straight away, which I'm not sure how I'd answer. What's the difference between a symbol and a sign? Any other comments or questions or an idea about that? Obviously, it's a very loaded.
It's really strange. I have the old, the first version of the translation here, and there it says the symbol into a thing.
All right.
Totally different. So is kind of strange. I mean, in semiotics, there are these kind of differences, but it always presupposes a certain kind of semiotic theory. It does not make sense in this context, actually, because I don't see that Ilyenkov upholds these kind of differences between sign and symbol. Usually in semiotics, it was like, I think it started with Morris, with the more behaviorist interpretation of the semiotics of Peirce, that a sign is something you have also in animals, like you have a sign, a kind of impulse as a sign, and a symbol is something with a more abstract meaning, so to say. But yeah. I'm not sure if that is the case here. We really have to check this. It seems very strange to me.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so for like there's overlap with Peirce and some things that Ilyenkov has written, but you think he'd kind of introduced that. So I agree that like partly a sign could mean almost like something that orients or prepares behavior, which is what it would be in the Peircean meaning, and symbol implies an interpretans, like
exactly. But even in this case, a symbol would already include this kind of function. It's more than this function, but it includes it already. So how can it be transformed? It can reduce to a sign, but it cannot be transformed into a sign.
Yeah, thanks. Andrew, then Corinna.
Throughout the, so if you go to the previous paragraphs, in fact, the previous account up till now, certainly when he starts talking about money and political economy, you'll see this sign symbol dichotomy used. And it's clear from it's clear what he means when he does it. What he means is the following. You have firstly the idea, we have a commodity as a use value, which has an exchange value. That needs to be represented. So I'll say the value of one commodity has to be represented in another. And that other is then going to be what we call a symbol, or what Ilyenkov calls a symbol. eventually that symbol is crystallized as the universal equivalent called money. Money is another commodity. It started off as a family. We've got all these commodities, but money then takes on the function in this society of being the symbol of the value of all the other commodities. So that's the moneyed commodity. At that point, we're using the word symbol. But the next thing that happens is that money ceases to actually be used in circulation. So practically speaking, banks hold money and they issue notes, or at the same time you get coins being issued by the state, but they're not really gold, they're just symbols of gold. They are what Ilyenkov is referring to as signs. Now, I did wonder myself, this distinction between symbol and sign, what would a semiotician make of that? I'm no expert. I'm not a linguist. I'm not a semiotician. So I've been thinking about whether it holds, but it is consistent language. And Ilyenkov is extremely clear that it's the move to when money's out of circulation. And we just, firstly, we just see the commodity before it's exchanged. We see it with price. The price form says this is how much money there is. So there's a symbol for money there. Then we exchange it for hard cash. But even that hard cash is not actually money. It's just a note which says, here's £1 of gold. You can go and get it from the bank. And of course, with non-fiduciary money now, you can't even go and get the gold from the bank. Ilyenkov's very clear that this is a very important step from symbol to sign. And at that point, what he says earlier is that the pound of money, we think of the pound not as a pound of weight of gold, but a pound as a unit of value. And it's at that precise moment we go from symbol to sign, according to Ilyenkov's text here.
Andrew, can I ask back maybe for everybody, because one thing is not really clear to me. Is sign as a term for some kind of use value, right? It is like the more primitive form, so to say. I mean, in terms of complexity. Then you move on to the symbol, money, as the symbol of the system of exchange with coins or whatever you use. But how is a symbol then transformed into a sign? That I don't get. This is why I stumbled upon this particular passage. You're totally right. There is a distinction made by Ilyenkov. I think it's consistent, but at this particular instance, I don't see how you go from a symbol to a sign. How is that? I don't understand.
Well, in one regard, if you're just talking about your prior understanding of what a symbol is and what a sign is, then you may have a prior understanding of symbol and a prior understanding of sign, which is different from Ilyenkov.
Yeah, sure.
In that respect, this might be a matter of terminology, and I'm not an expert. You are in the terminology. So, but I think the important point isn't obviously a point about terminology, and should be clear. The important point should be clear that we do have to. It's very important that this process happens historically and logically, going from first money as another commodity, and then going to the note as a sign of money as another commodity. That's the important thing, okay. Because you end up with these pounds representing units of value, and so you've got, and another phrase Ilyenkov uses is pure sign. And the thing he wants to emphasize is that once you get to that point, it's very easy to to ignore the material process and the material context within which all of this happens and must happen. And that's exactly what he accuses Husserl and many other idealists of different kinds of failing to see. They think that there are these pure signs which, and this comes back to someone who previously said, they think, that's you. You were saying, can't we see the thing purely immediately as the thing in itself? Well, Ilyenkov saying absolutely you can't, and the illusion that you can arises when you fail to note the material process taking you to this pure sign.
Mm-hmm.
The other bit, so I wonder whether it works with this. I just mentioning this, I think this is pretty widely known. I'm not using it in any technical sense, but Barthes and Baudrillard talk about there being a simulacrum. So we have a stage of money where I'll give a better example than money, but okay, it represents a certain quantity of gold where it's functioning in that sort of way, versus so a simulacrum is then functioning just it's become separated from almost like how it was christened, where it has a referent, and the sign itself kind of takes on new properties and kind of starts circulating separately from what it was to do with. So in a way that the relation between Mickey Mouse and a mouse, there's a point at which there was a mouse, and then this symbol represented the mouse, and then that's the symbol for the mouse, and then that symbol became a sign when it's Mickey Mouse, and now we're kind of it has its own system within Disney, and the mouses, like actual mice, are long forgotten. I don't know if it works with that kind of Baudrillard.
Just to say that another key point, which isn't really emphasized in this text of Ilyenkov's, but it's obviously Marx's key point, is that the root of all this is the value of the commodity. And that value is understood as congealed, abstract, socially necessary labor, which obviously raises some issues on itself, so maybe it's just as well he doesn't emphasize it. But what that does, the fact that the crucial point is that money, and then whether it's fiduciary money or a pound note, is representing something else, and that's the labor of the other commodities, the labor congealed in the other commodities. And that is the labor congealed in the other commodities, which is actually I have to use the word essence here. We're uncovering that when Marx he's uncovering that as the root. That means that money and notes and derivatives, people have put fictitious capital, they are all ultimately secondary in the sense that it's socially necessary labor time, which is the essence, and we see that in economic crises. If this money ceases to represent at all the underlying socially necessary labor time in products, there will be an economic crisis. And that's what economic crises are. The prices have moved too far away from the value of commodities. So in that sense, there's that, and Engels has that as like, that's when the law of gravity, and again, we got universals and laws in this paragraph. That's the law of value is when these prices, Mickey Mouse, all of those things go too far away from the underlying labor times.
Thank you. Great. I think we're done with this paragraph. Unless there are any final comments, we'll move on to the next one. Oh, Corinna.
Yeah, just to agree basically with what's been said, but the importance is that this is a process of, it's a dialectical movement. It's a journey that takes place in both historically and logically. as I think Andrew mentioned, this coming together of the historical and the logical, or the simultaneous movement of those, so that in this movement from the material body to a symbol, to a sign, we have moments of dialectical transformation, and that if something is a material body, that's the complete opposite of being a symbol. The symbol, as he stresses again and again, the symbol has none of the properties of the thing that it represents. It's irrelevant, actually, what its material properties might be, whether it's a cowrie shell or a hide of a cattle, as it used to be in money, or gold or fiduciary notes. So, but I mean, I think the important thing is at the end of this paragraph, he stresses that the symbol, well, it's so rich, this. First of all, the symbol, it says the last sentence is the immediate body of the ideal image of external sense, or more precisely, it's law of existence, the universal. So the symbol has, as Spinoza would have said, it's under the auspices of the universal. The symbol in itself, it brings together these complex of relationships. And the symbol is the key to understanding the material. The abstract symbol is the key to understanding the material physical process, or one of the keys anyway. It is complex because we're talking about not just a kind of straight, direct process of addition and subtraction. We're talking about total transformation at really at many points. And it's the other thing that comes out as well is that the universal, which is an abstract concept, is also a real thing. It's not just a thing in your head. That the fact that money can have this universalizing function, as Andrew said, because fundamentally through all these transformations, it expresses the socially necessary labor time in the production of the commodity. So therefore it has this expression of the universal. It's a real thing. It's not just some subjective thing that we pin upon the pound note or the credit default swap. And I thought, if everybody looks in the chat, there's some great comments there, because obviously Andrew's traced it right up to money as a unit of value. But then what happens after that? What happens when it turns into fictitious forms of money or value? But as Ralph said, so in a way we're having a process of being and not being here. The not being of fictitious value. What is it? It's an absence, as Bhaskar would have said. There's an absence of value, and yet it has a function. It has the function of causing a crisis. In fact, one of it. It cannot be escaped. You can't escape from this thing, even if it's hidden and takes very peculiar forms. And as Penny made the note that this is really important in this point in history, when we've got a lot of theories saying it doesn't really matter whether there is anything behind money or behind the financial transactions that go on. That doesn't matter. We can just carry on forever and print as much money as we like, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very revealing passage. I do think, Sasha, I know Giuliano doesn't like splitting up Ilyenkov sentences, but I think a lot of the sentences in this material do need to be split. They're a bit turgid, a bit hard to, I know it's didactic, but it makes it really hard to grapple with.
Yeah. We will do one more paragraph, but I'll just come to Sasha Surmava before we do that.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. This problem about the distinction between symbol and flat sign is very important for Ilyenkov. but I rather think that the material of which was interested Ilyenkov, the material of development of deaf and blind children, is much more useful to explain this movement from symbol to sign. Because in fact, this is insufficient combination, only symbol and sign, because the first step is the material tool. Material tool, symbol, and then only sign. A child acquires a Löffel, spoon.
Yeah.
Then on the next, and the spoon is the ideal representation of liquid. And its corporeal form of the spoon is not something indifferent or unimportant. To be an ideal representation of liquid, it must be just concrete form. The next step is just symbolization. When an adult teacher takes a hand of this little child and demonstrate the movement as if it has a spoon and as if he eats with this spoon. And only on the final stage, this movement, symbolic movement, can be replaced with pure sign, conventional sign. And Ilyenkov stresses that there is only one real direction. That's why I stressed earlier that the idea that a material tool, that the material tool is the universal, genetically first form of ideality, both in biological realm, when the body of a bird ideally represents its object, air and flight. Then in our culture, when our tools are artificial tools, cultural tools, these tools, wings of an airplane ideally represents the same object as the wings of a live bird. And that's why they look alike. And I think that the science about science, semiotics. Semiotics was something which was very hostile to Ilyenkov. Ilyenkov disliked semiotics as a science about nothing, about conventionalities. While the idea, the realm of conventionality is ideology, while the realm of truth is real history, real practical activity, real labor, which deals with real instruments, real tools. Human tools is the first historically and the universal form of idealization of the universe. with activity of a human subject.
Yeah. In terms of terminology, yes, thank you, Sasha. I think in terms of terminology, it's then clear, and I think Andy also made it clear already that the confusion lies when we use this kind of semiotic terminology, because there the symbol is the most conventional stage, so to say. Yes. So that's why we get confused. Yes, but I totally understand that Ilyenkov uses the term of the sign as, so to say, the symbol of conventionality. But on the other hand, there's no big problem with reading Ilyenkov in a semiotic way, but it's just that the semiotics, which were famous at the time, they were, as I said, after this kind of popularization in a behaviorist setting, and then it turned into something self-sufficient and not really about the world anymore. The interesting thing is that he uses symbol for this more practical and fuller understanding of the relations.
Something rooted in the real object.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to say,
just one moment. There's interesting detail that Vygotsky, there is a, I think, rather naive idea that Vygotsky was connected with Spinoza and Ilyenkov. It's entirely false idea, because Vygotsky was the admirer of a idea of sign as something arbitrary. He stressed the developed sign is arbitrary sign. So it's just opposite direction of development of theory than Ilyenkov.
Vygotsky says, for example, that we have to keep in mind that although there is an arbitrary aspect to it, there's a crucial difference between talking about a sign which is a knot tied in a handkerchief versus a sign which is the diary of an adolescent, through the entrenchment those two have in the personality or the life as a whole of that person. That's what, for Vygotsky, is the difference there. But I want to stress that actually there's a bad semiotics, which is from de Saussure, where it kind of doesn't really work. Roman Jakobson through to post-structuralists as well, but with Peirce is a more subtle author, and I think there's probably quite productive interactions there. However, I still agree with Sasha's comments there, because going into the next paragraph, I wonder, so for Peirce, all we see is signs, and I think so far Ilyenkov would agree, but therefore for Peirce, all we think is signs, and there's no Archimedean point outside of, in terms of explaining, like, although we might posit them, it is always signs that we're dealing with. And I think perhaps that introduction of the concept of a tool slightly complicates that. Peirce would still absolutely describe tools. So a hammer has prepares our activity in the same way that a road sign prepares our activity. So he would see those as the same. But I think it's quite interesting to note the kind of materiality of the tool in the way that,
what we are dealing with is really some kind of common understanding in a way, and it's not really quite obvious where exactly the differences lie, because the terminology seem to be every time a little bit different. For example, if I bring in another perspective, that of Cassirer, who also uses only symbol, not so much sign, and differentiates then in the symbol three functions of the symbol, where you have a more expressive bodily function than a representative, and then a purely conventional. It's always a function for him of symbol, but also he has the same idea. He has this in an article called Form and Technik, where he also says the tool is the beginning. Yeah, it's even the beginning of our concept of causality. Only with the tool we understand that it has an effect. And I think in Peirce it's pretty much the same. But he goes the other way around. Peirce is a realist, quite even in a medieval sense almost. But he tries to bring in the real into the signs themselves by iconicity. So the signs are somehow resembling. Yeah, there's some kind of period where they, grow, and by growing, you have a kind of relation, some kind of iconic realism. It's a total different way, but still, what has to be stressed is that he also recognized that the bodily activity and the practical activity, it cannot be disconnected from our understanding of sign and meaning. And in this, they are pretty much on the same page, even though they look from different perspectives and have different terminology. It's so, Ilyenkov tries to develop further the dialectical logic he finds in Capital and brings it up to a level which we would maybe call or have called semiotic in a way, but it's not his aim to develop semiotics with this. It's just to understand the specific relations involved.
So that we don't run over, I think on the one hand, this next paragraph is exactly what we were saying. So I wonder if we can both end and start the next session with this paragraph. So I'll read it out, and if we have like an initial comment, we can make it and then we can come back to it because it's a rich paragraph. So bottom of 9, the symbol removed from the actual metabolic process between the social human and nature ceases to be a symbol as such. Now, in other words, this physical, sensuously perceptible thing ceases to be the physical shell of the ideal image. Its soul vanishes from its body, but the soul existing within it, the thing, and through it was this objective activity of the social being realizing the metabolic process between human eyes and virgin nature. Without an ideal image, humans cannot realize the metabolic process between ourselves and nature, and the individual cannot act as a real mediator between natural things insofar as these objects are involved in the process of social production and function in it as a matter, a means or instrument of this production. While the ideal image requires for its actualization precisely this substantiated matter, including language with its linguistic symbolics. Therefore, the social labor generates a need for language, and then language itself, speech, emerges not, as the neo-positivists assert, vice versa. When a person acts with a symbol or with a sign and not with an object based on a symbol and sign, she is not acting in an ideal way. The person acts only in a verbal way. It often happens that instead of seeing a thing's real essence through a term, the individual sees only the term itself with the traditional meaning, sees only the symbol, its sensually perceptible body. In this case, the language symbolics from a powerful tool of real action with real things is transformed into a fetish, blocking that reality which it represents with its body. As a result, instead of really seeing and consciously changing the external world according to its own universal laws expressed in the form of the ideal image, this person begins to see and change only the verbal terminological expression of this world, and thinks that in this way he has changed the world itself. But the world and effectively human existence does not change by one iota because of this, and does not even notice this. So there's loads here. However, we can start again next time, but anything which relates to what we were just talking about that you want to say about this bit from anyone, and then we'll finish off after that. But we'll pick this up to unpack it. But anything tying to our previous discussion from here.
Welcome, Miguel, who just joined us.
I have a rather far-fetched comment
Okay.
on this.
Great, that's the best type.
It's because I'm just writing about Lifshitz, and he had, as you know, he had a big problem with modernism. It resembles a little bit what Ilyenkov says here about neo-positivism and the conventionality of science, namely that you can have an attitude towards things where you only manipulate conventional science but change nothing. I thought this is a quite nice last word for the session, because then we can understand what where the emphasis of Ilyenkov comes from. We have this great system of symbols and signs, but inside of the system, there's also a kind of, there's this aspect of reification. We talked about a fetish, what he says here, which brings it to a mode which only simulates thought in general, because language without any kind of consequence, as Peirce, for example, would say, a symbol without a real change in the world has no meaning.
Yeah.
And it's the same a little bit with Lifshitz and modernism. He defines modernism as exactly this kind of avant-garde attitude where you can feel very engaged and very, edgy, but things change. You have to change nothing. You basically don't have to change. Otherwise, the whole system breaks down.
My first thought, this is the difference between liberalism and socialism as well. Like a company is happy to put a rainbow flag on something as long as it doesn't cost it anything. Lars?
Well, I was thinking, that even if you only speak, you don't change anything in the external world, you at least change the neural structures in your mind, and that is then a prerequisite for acting, to change the world. So you change actually something, and the neural structures is one of the cornerstones of the ideal, as far as I understand, in Ilyenkov. So it's not that easy, that you can sort of separate acting in your mind from acting in the world. I think if you talk about communication rather than language, communication is a prerequisite for life. You can't actually live without communicating with other people. So this is a bit more complicated, I think, than the text says here.
Okay. Corinna?
I don't quite agree with Sasha Freyberg on that, because of course the symbol, as Ilyenkov says, may be completely different, have absolutely nothing to do with what it represents. In some cases, it may have something to do with, like we said, with gold and so on. There's in terms of money and production, there is still a connection, even if it becomes severed at a certain point. The connection is severed. But I think I'm on Lars' side here. I think that if thinking is an activity, thinking is a practice, and that when we work with symbols or words or signs, when we work with them by developing thoughts and by communicating with others and in association with practice, all kinds of practices, including mental practices, it does change the world. It may not change the world in a way that, may not bring about a revolution, or it may not end global warming, but it does have a powerful, it can have a powerful connection. Depends what happens at the end of the process. It's just, I think that everything has this, even symbols that are disconnected, they have a content. There is a content there. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I think I put it, of course, a little bit crude. That's why I said it's a little bit far-fetched, because also with Lifshitz, you would have to explain what he's aiming at. He's not aiming at what we understand as.
You cut out, Sasha. He's not aiming at what we understand as. You cut out at
as modern.
Okay. The way you stopped was, sorry, go on.
Sorry, yeah, it's a little bit unstable, my connection. Sorry for that. His criticism of modern art is not at all what he means with modernism. He addresses a certain kind of consciousness, so to say, a false consciousness. And Corinna, you're totally right. I think that's not, there is no, there cannot be an absolute criteria defining what brings a change and what not. Of course, it can take a while that things, also in terms of words, for example, you change some kind of names for things and you don't see why, but maybe it brings about a different understanding somehow. Yes, you're right, but the point was rather that there is a whole system of avoiding action in language, in the system created out of action. Yeah, it turns around, so to say, dialectically into, or it can be brought into a system which avoids action. That's the whole point. And I think in this respect, Ilyenkov and Lifshitz are totally on the same page. They just speak about it differently.
Thanks. Okay, so Lars, did you want to come back?
No, I think Sasha put it very prominently, very distinct. That's I see it in the same way. I mean, of course, you can use language for hiding the real essence, or you can use it for illuminating real essence. But every time you make a speech or make an utterance, something happens in your mind and in other people's minds that are listening to you.
But yeah, so just to take it back, like what's happening at the level that there are these separate levels of the symbol versus sign. What's actually changing the function, the functional system, isn't necessarily. So if you basically, if you change the variable, it's not going to change the function. So actually, I do think there's still a distinction just based on the paragraphs that we've read, where the extent of the impact, it's possible to say these things up here at the sign level, if you change them, it's not going to be as impactful as changing some of the lower things. So again, let's say the British Army puts in their adverts that they are encouraging people from all backgrounds to join the army. At a symbolic level, they are increasing equality, but then there's a separate level at which they're making equality worse. Yes, sorry, I shouldn't ramble. That was self-indulgent of me. Last comment from anyone, and back to Corinna after that.
Yeah, maybe a last comment in connection with what you said, and also in continuity with what I brought up. I think it's about a dialectical understanding of symbolic systems as such, with Lifshitz and Ilyenkov, in that what looks good is not good intentions, and everything is for nothing if you don't create a relation with the actual world. You can parade. This is again a Peirce quote. It should be studied what people do, not what they parade. That's crucial, and I think it's the same point. Yeah.
Thanks. And back to Corinna.
Okay, thanks very much. Just to say there are a number of corrections in this text, and hopefully, Sasha, you can liaise with Giuliano and Olga, because it would be nice to have it for the next session if we can, possibly.